We're talking tight ends, studs, and sleepers with Emory Hunt from CBS Sports. We're going to break down everything from how he evaluates tight ends to some of the guys you may not even know that you should be paying attention to for your dynasty rookie drafts. All that and more on an all-new episode of the Pretend GM Fantasy Football Show starting now. Emory, it is awesome to have you on the show, man. This is something where in the offseason, I try to have NFL draft analysts and then, our dynasty data bros come on, but I'm not going to lie. It's really fun to just talk ball with someone that watches a lot of film and has played the game. And I'm so happy to have you on, man. Thank you for joining me today.
Appreciate you, man. I love the show. You've done a great job with it. I'm just happy to be a part of it.
Awesome, man. So one thing I noticed about the way you do your rankings, it's not your traditional, okay, here's my number one all the way through 20, especially when you're looking at positions like wide receiver, tight end, and tight end in particular is what we're going to talk about today. I've noticed you have your inline tight ends, your H-backs, your flex, and these different variations of the tight end position because it's not just a one size fits all thing. Can you talk about that a little bit and like how that would affect, let's say, fantasy managers, right? When they're looking at a tight end and say, okay, this guy's probably a little bit more valuable for fantasy versus being more valuable for the NFL.
Yeah, at the end of the day, you can't ask, and I always use this when I'm talking about receivers, you can't, grade Wes Welker next to Randy Moss. They're playing
Right.
they're two different positions. They're playing wide receiver, but they're playing two different spots. So they're required to do different things within their job role. Same thing and they could both be on the field at the same time and doing their elite level skills separately. Same with the tight end position. You could have an H-back, a flex, and an inline guy on the field at the same time, and they're doing different things. And so when you look at the flex receiver or tight end, that's essentially what it is. Who's a guy that you think is more of your vertical big wide receiver that isn't as refined as a blocker? Who's that guy? Who's the Mike Gesicki of
That's exactly what I was thinking of as you're saying it.
That's the flex tight end. And then when you think about an H-back, someone that can kind of do a little bit of everything. And some of this, the H-back and inline can kind of cross, or H-back and flex, they can kind of play both. I feel like the best H-back type would be a Kyle Juszczyk, who was a tight end at Harvard and then had to transition to being, a fullback when he got with the Ravens and then blossom into being what he is with San Francisco. That's the kind of cross, because you can hand him the football in the backfield. He can run with the ball like a running back. He can block rather well. He can run routes rather well, and he can catch the ball comfortably as if he's, a flex tight end. So the H-back is kind of, if to answer your question, they're probably the more valuable of the two. The inline guy is more of your consistent blocker. You see a George Kittle that can do the inline thing, but also can be an H-back and also a flex. So San Francisco, that's why they're so dominant, because they got two guys that are elite at doing multiple things. But you trust the inline guy more as a blocker. He helps your run game, and also he does your traditional stick routes at the tight end position to help himself out in the passing game. But your H-back and your inline are probably a little bit more valuable. The flex guy is where fantasy football and a lot of people get more excited about, even though it doesn't always manifest itself like how you envision the, Jimmy Grahams of the world or the Kyle Pitts. But when you look at fantasy production, you're probably looking more so along the lines of your George Kittles, your Kyle Juszczyk, your Mark Andrews, those type of guys that tend to have the more sustained fantasy relevant success.
Well, I'm glad you kind of bridged that gap there from, real football to fantasy. That's what I try to do here on the show as often as I can is, let's make sure that when someone's listening or watching this show, they leave here a little bit smarter and they understand a little bit more about the game and they can be better at playing fantasy football. And I like the way you broke it down there. There's two players that, if I'm not mistaken, you have in different categories. Kenyon Sadiq as an H-back, and then you've got Eli Stowers as a flex tight end. Those are pretty much the two top consensus guys, whether it's NFL draft or fantasy. If you have to pick one between the two of them of who's most likely to be this fantasy superstar, and I know I'm kind of putting you on the spot here, who would you be picking out of these two guys?
Probably Sadiq because you can get him the football quicker. You're asking Stowers, and it's I know some teams are looking at Stowers more so as a receiver as opposed to a tight end. So now you kind of okay, can he get off bump press? Can he read coverage on the fly? But with an H back like Sadiq, you can kind of get him the football as an outlet guy and let him break a tackle and get upfield. So you could rack up the receptions fantasy wise for a Sadiq more so than a Stowers. Stowers may, and if I'm using the fantasy term correctly, Stowers may have more best ball potential as opposed to the PPR potential of a Sadiq, if that makes sense.
You know what, man? You just earned your fantasy wings because, like, that's the one thing that every fantasy analyst says at least one time a year. Yeah, he's probably better in best ball. Yeah, that's always like the high variance upside guys there. Yeah, I mean, I like both of these players. I'm not as high on this tight end class as I thought I was going to be. The more I dug into it, it's not a bad class by any means, but I don't think we have as many of those high level guys. So I'm very intrigued to see where these players end up. That's become like the toughest thing now as guys go into the NFL. It's going to be what's their landing spot because so many more teams are using 12 and 13 personnel. It's okay, how are these guys actually going to be used when they get into the NFL? With that in mind, is are we seeing that maybe the tight end position is getting devalued a little bit? Maybe like for when it comes to production and fantasy aspect, because there are so many tight ends in the field and they're being asked to do different responsibilities every time they're out there.
Yeah, I think the league always kind of goes in waves.
Mm-hmm.
I remember when everybody wanted the big tall receiver because of Randy Moss, thinking that every 6'5" receiver was Randy Moss, and not realizing what made Randy Moss had nothing to do with him being 6'5". Him being 6'5" just made it look cooler, right?
Yeah.
And so then you saw everybody wants the long corners, because they felt like you could press these guys at the line of scrimmage. You match up versus the 6'5" receivers, and then the league went to shorter receivers because it's hard for these taller guys to really get their hips flip fluidly and quickly versus twitchier, shorter receivers. And now you go back to shorter corners, which we used to have, and then so everything goes in cycles. So the tight end position, when everybody was looking for, everybody was scouring NCAA tournaments to find the next Antonio Gates and Jimmy Graham because these guys play basketball, and the Mo Alley Coxes because they play basketball, as opposed to just going find tight ends that actually play tight end. And then we get back to that, now with these H-back types. And so, yeah, there's it's always going to go in cycles because now the big wave and what we're seeing now come out more so of the college ranks is the wide receivers. And I've said this before, with the advent of the boom of the 4 and 5 wide receiver sets, you get receivers with more time on task. You're seeing less tight ends, more polished receivers coming out ready to hit the ground running. No longer are we saying, well, it takes 3 years for a receiver to really get going at the pro level. Not anymore, because they've got their 10,000 hours in college. And so for these tight ends, because you're seeing less of them, or you're seeing more athletic tight ends just be bigger wide receivers, you kind of get that hybrid that we're seeing now. And as I always say this, we always love the idea of the Kenyan Sadiqs until the actual Kenyan Sadiq gets to the league and they go underutilized. We see this every year where the tight ends don't, you like the idea of the athletic tight end because you're still thinking in terms of the Jimmy Grahams and you're thinking in terms of the Antonio Gates of the world, but really most of them kind of end up being a lot like, Isaiah Likely, where they'll have spurts here and there, but they won't have these gaudy fantasy numbers where it justifies the high selection of those guys in fantasy drafts.
To kind of break the fourth wall back into NFL from fantasy, like I look at some of these guys, and because the direction the league is going, and because of what you just said, is it's oftentimes these super athletic guys go underutilized. I start to ask myself if, unless you have a real unicorn of a tight end, which I think some people might say Kenyon Sadiq is, I don't know that there's a guy in this draft that's worth the top 20, top 25 pick, but I'm seeing Sadiq go a lot of times in mock drafts, top 15, top 20 consistently. Is that kind of how you see it as well? Do you think these guys are going to be going later than expected or earlier than expected?
Are you talking about in fantasy or in?
In like in the actual NFL draft, because draft capital always plays somewhat of a factor in how people will value these players in fantasy. They'll say, well, this guy's the top 20 pick, so utilization is going to be there, right? So do you think that any of these guys, and I know it's such a funny bridge that people try to make, it's always the leap, right? But is that something where you see, okay, these guys or Sadiq, Stowers, whomever is absolutely locked in first round pick or top 20 pick? Or do you think maybe we might see some of these guys go a little bit later?
I think we may see a lot of these guys go a little bit later because in the draft, there's always a run on a position, and it's all about who starts the run first. And so let's say we know this year there won't be a run on quarterbacks. There won't be a run on running backs, but there could potentially be a run on receivers and offensive tackles. So you may see the first receiver. Once you see the first receiver go off the board, teams panic, and next thing you know, you see maybe 3 or 4 receivers come off the board. That pushes down more options. You may see the first tackle or edge rusher go off the board at pick 2 or 3. Once that happens, you may see a run on edge rushers and tackles, which pushes those other I would say nine depth positions in terms of the high end positions down. So you may, instead of seeing a Jeremiah Love go 4, because you may get the early run on receivers, edge, or tackles, Jeremiah Love now falls to maybe 18, right? Which means Sadiq might fall down to 24, 25 in a real draft. But it all depends on. That's why it's so tough to predict. It all depends on how much of the position is at the top, juxtaposed to where the cutoff is, and when the first player is selected. So if you have, let's say for instance, when you had the quarterback class of 2024, we had 7 quarterbacks in the top 10 or whatever it was, or something crazy like that. Well, we knew we were going to get quarterbacks probably 1, 2, 3, or and so because they went 1, 2, 3, and everybody had these teams had high grades on other quarterbacks, we got to get these guys now, as opposed to maybe we could have got this guy at slot 15 or 16, but you got to draft this guy now because what if someone else trades up to go? So you have all of that going on. But if you only have one elite graded tight end or one elite graded running back, that guy is going to fall because there's no fear of the run. So the team that wants a running back or wants a tight end that are in the teens may still have that opportunity to get them because of the potential run of the receivers and tackles and edge rushers.
I want to talk more about these tight end prospects, but before I do, guys, if you have enjoyed even just a minute of this podcast, this episode, previous episodes, anything, please take a second to like this video here on YouTube, comment down below, make sure you're subscribed to the channel so you don't miss an episode. And also, we're on Apple, we're on Spotify. Leaving a 5-star review there helps the little independent podcast that the Pretend GM is right now continue to grow. We're already an award-winning podcast. We are growing. We're getting new viewers and listeners every single week, but that doesn't happen without you guys. So I definitely need your help there. And the Pretend GM Rookie Draft Guide version 4.0 is going to be out today. You go to pretendgm.com/guide. We've got over 80 prospect profiles, 100 plus pages. You've got 4 different sets of rankings for your rookie drafts that you can follow through. We've got medical reports from Dr. Vignesh Doraiswamy. We've got low, median, and high fantasy player comps for each player in the guide. It's just a labor of love. And I think as I say this, I'm preaching to the choir because as I say it out loud, I'm like 80 prospects. And Emory's like, get on my level, dude. 1,200 prospects. Everett, can you please take a second to tell everyone about what you have going on over at Football Game Plan and the just chunker of a guide that you put out every year?
Hey, listen, it's a true labor of love. When you think about evaluation of prospects, and I attend all 8 All-Star games, so
wow.
I'm ASICs on the ground everywhere, and my initial thought, because Football Game Plan has been in existence since 2007. So we're coming up on 20 years next season. And so my whole thing was, if I'm going to go, so I was putting all my draft content out on my YouTube channel since 2009. And then 2018, I thought, like, man, I want to do a guide, but kick the can down the road until 2020. Well, I first put out the guy because COVID had us all sitting down, so I now had
Yeah.
the time to put it out. So if I was going to go to all these All Star games, why not have reports on everybody you just watched? Otherwise, what's the purpose? And then, what I noticed about since '09 up until 2020, putting my rankings out on my YouTube channel every year for the draft segment of the calendar. And like, you have your numbers of how you graded. Now I have binders of handwritten notes. And so, but people always ask, well, why does this guy rank here and this guy ranks here, even though they have the same grade? Like, what's the difference? It's instead of me going back and forth in the comments and giving my evaluation, I was like, man, let me just put it out all together. So therefore, it keeps me accountable. People can see how I got to my grade, and they have less questions. And so that just kind of started it. And we put out a draft guide every year. This year is over 1,200. Last year was over 1,200. And if someone purchased a draft guide since 2020, right now they would have over 6,600 individual scouting reports at their fingertips. And so what that tells you is that you got a pretty good gauge on every NFL team, every UFL team, every CFL team, because these guys go everywhere, and it helps you better predict on who's gonna be a good team, who's gonna win, because you got reports on everybody. You operating like a real scouting department because you have so many profiles on virtually everybody that's in the league right now. So it helps you just kind of get a good gauge of predicting who can be successful, who's going to win. And betting, it helps you there because if you understand the rosters, you understand who got the advantage and you can make better wagers. So it does it because I know how much film matters. So I'm always watching film. I'm always at the All-Star games. And to put out this draft guide this year, again, just huge tip of the cap to just what the process entails.
Listen, guys, if a player has touched a football, Emory has watched the film on him. The shout out to you guys at the Miami 11 and under league. Emory's already scouting. It's there. It's
It's,
there, man.
it's, it's oh, and people can go pick it up at footballgameplan.com slash
There we go.
2026 draft guide.
Perfect, man. Perfect. Yeah, and I mean, it's just honestly, we should be looking at everyone's different analysis as we get closer and closer to the NFL draft because there's so many different viewpoints and things we have to kind of take into consideration. For example, the other guy that we haven't talked about yet, Eli Stowers. He's my top fantasy tight end going into this year. I know it's something you kind of touched on about like how a flex guy can be sort of the sexier position. I really love his route running. I love his ability to adjust on the fly to zone coverage, his sort of spatial awareness that he has. I know there's going to be extremely obvious questions about his blocking and what he's going to do because I don't think he can do it. But when we talk about Eli Stowers finding a fit in the NFL and what that could mean for fantasy, what do you see for him?
I see, the big receiver, the guy that can win above the rim. Once they get inside the red zone or inside the green zone, 10-yard line, 5-yard line going in, he's going to be probably split out wide as an X, and try to isolate him versus a backer or a safety and throw a jump ball toward him, right? He's going to be that type of guy. Or you get creative where you could line him up in the slot to where now he's running that bang eight against a corner where that he could play high post against, body him up and go up and get the football, right? So his frame is going to be utilized that way. And I think that's where you kind of see, okay, is he going to be consistently, and we're talking about this from a fantasy perspective, he's going to be consistently utilized in between the 20s, or he's going to be heavily utilized inside the 20s more so than outside the 20s. And, is he going to be someone that's going to be featured? That's where, for him, I feel like fit comes into play. Because if he goes somewhere, let's say like a Baltimore, where he's, and we don't know what the scheme is going to be for Baltimore right now, but them losing Isaiah Likely opens up the door for them to get another tight end that kind of can play off of a Mark Andrews, which would be the ideal for him. If he goes to Buffalo, he kind of can be a pseudo 1B because he can be the big receiver. He can be the guy that can work himself open down the field for Josh Allen as he buys time around the pocket. Like, if he goes to Chicago, I know it's not a possibility, but we're talking about how a two tight end set can be utilized with a guy like Colston Loveland and a guy like Cole Kmet. So you can envision him being it. So that's why when we talk about Star Wars, his his projection is mostly where he ends up because it's not one that can kind of yield high low production if he goes anywhere.
It's funny you mentioned Baltimore as the first team there because that's become my greatest fear is that he does end up as a Baltimore Raven. Not because it would be bad for football, because I think it would be really fun for that Ravens offense, but because they deploy their tight ends in the slot more than any other team in the NFL. That's likely where Stowers goes. It's a fit for him to replace Isaiah Likely. And my greatest fear is that he ends up having the Isaiah Likely production. And we're just like, oh, cool. He's the tight end 23 in fantasy football. It's not really helpful for anyone. You never know when to start him. So I just think it's funny that you bring that up because I do end up actually thinking it's a pretty good fit. One of the things that you do every year is find the guys late in the draft. It could be, round 7, undrafted guys even. But we've also seen that there have been tight ends that have been able to break into fantasy in their rookie season, whether it's been Harold Fannin and Aronde Gadsden the second this past year, or guys that end up doing it in their second year. Tucker Kraft, Trey McBride was a second round pick, so it's not like that late. But do you see any guys from this class being selected outside of round 1, maybe even a day 3 pick that you're like, this guy's got potential?
It's a guy we're probably going to talk about later in Bauer Sharp. I feel like Sharp plays.
Let's just talk about him now. I'm
Okay.
excited to learn about him because I have not seen the film yet on Bauer Sharp, so this is a good kind of table setting for me.
Yeah, Sharp to me runs really good routes. He's someone that he got savvy. When we talk about savvy, as I'm pulling up his scouting report, you talk about the ability to read coverage on the fly, to learn how to use leverage well, separate yourself at the top of the route, all of those things. He does that extremely well. I also feel like he play all three spots. He can
Okay.
play an H back, he can be a flex, he can be a inline guy. He's not the fastest, but he's open a lot. It's a game of short area bursts. It's not a game of 40-yard sprints. So, if you can get open quickly, you're going to find yourself available a lot. So, for Sharp, having played at 3 different universities, Oklahoma, Louisiana, and Southeastern Louisiana, he's got talent, man. He catches the ball rather well. And I feel like that's an area for him to where, because he can, block a little bit, enough to where he's not a liability, because he gets open quicker, which reveals yourself quicker in a fast-paced game to where you got to who's open first is the number one target, and because he has good run after catch skills, I feel like this is someone that probably is going to end up going on day 3 that ends up being fantasy relevant as a rookie.
I love that. We need, first of all, fantasy people love to get fed these sleepers, man. Like this is what we thrive on and everyone gets really excited about. So Bauer Sharp, everybody, mark it down in your notes as you're listening along here. Um, you mentioned that he can play all 3 different spots, and I always am curious here. I don't want to reduce it down to just like one thing. But if there's a thing that for you is sort of the make or break skill set for a tight end when you're evaluating them, at least when it comes to like maybe production, right? How productive it could be, because we're trying to tie this into fantasy. What becomes most important for you when you're trying to evaluate how productive a tight end could be in the NFL?
Fluidity, can you be an athlete? Coaches used to always say, be an athlete, and a lot of times you're watching, it's an athletic game. And players at this position, especially the fluidity, has to matter. And how smoothly you can get in and out of your breaks, how easy you're able to weave through traffic. Think when you think fluidity, think of, I know this is probably the more extreme case of it, but it is that's the type of fluidity everybody's chasing, everybody's looking for. Look at a Travis Kelsey, and how he just moves. It's just easy. He's not the fastest. He's not faster than George Kittle. George Kittle is more explosive, but you look at Kelsey, he just moves easy. He's able to really read on the fly and then quickly stop and adjust and head back the other way. And that fluidity you need as an athlete at the NFL level, regardless of position, because stiff athletes stay hurt and they don't get open as quickly as the fluid one does. And I think when you see the George Kittle who has the explosiveness with some semblance of fluidity, but Kelsey to me is what you kind of look for in terms of how easy of a mover you are. And once you see that, you can kind of project the guy to be competent at the pro level.
Man, you just said stiff athletes stay hurt, and my bones started creaking a little bit. I went to the gym this morning, and I'm like, I forgot to stretch. This is not good. I'm sitting down for too long now. Man, I think there's a lot of interesting players in this tight end class, and one of the guys that I came across here who is highly ranked across fantasy and NFL draft experts, and I started watching the 2005 film, and I'm just like, I don't get it. And then I was told you got to go back and watch the 2024 film on Max Clare because his Purdue film is so much better than his Ohio State film. And a lot of that just becomes how he gets used in a scheme and who's around him. You've got these phenomenal wide receivers. How do you evaluate a player like that where, especially when we're evaluating prospects, oftentimes it's what have you done for me lately versus I've seen what your peak can be 2, 3 years ago. And because there's also a lot of players like that broke out as a freshman or a sophomore, and then their production dropped off junior and senior years. So, at least for Max Clare, how do you evaluate something specific like that?
Well, you have to go back to where he was predominantly used, but that doesn't mean disregard the 2025 tape, the recent tape, because the uniqueness of this era of college football is that is the storyline for a lot of players. Because you made case in point quarterback. You go and look at a Jacob Zeno, who was a quarterback at Texas A&M, sat the bench the whole year. Eligibility is up, but last year and for the last 3 years, he was a standout quarterback at UAB. So you got to go and evaluate his UAB tape, and you get nothing from him as an A&M Aggie. So Claire, he was much more twitched up at Purdue than he was at Ohio State. So that doesn't mean the Ohio State tape is invaluable. What was he doing at Ohio State? Was he asked to block more? Did he block more at Ohio State than he did at Purdue? So now you can combine the two and get a good picture. You have you have a guy in this class that's a true sleeper, in Michael Bracia, who was at Western Michigan as an H-back, phenomenal athlete, fluid athlete, easy, movement skills, catches the ball every time you threw it to him. Probably finished the year with like 9 catches. But the reason why he's a sleeper, because the previous 4 years he was a starting quarterback at Colgate, where he was someone that looked like Taysom Hill, and now you see him so this is someone that's probably going to end up going undrafted. But you're like, man, this dude's making plays in the preseason. Well, how did he go undrafted? Well, that's how, right? Because he, was more of a off tight end at Western Michigan because their starting tight end was the one getting all the options. So you got to really be in the weeds to find those type of guys, right? So for another example, a Dan Villari of Syracuse, quarterback, that turned into tight end. So now when you vision him being productive, you think, oh, this is a guy that could be like the Taysom Hill that can, run QB power, can throw the football, but also can be your flex tight end. So for Max Clare, it's about what did he do at Ohio State, but let's go and evaluate him as a Purdue Boilermaker and get a true gauge of his skill set as a receiver, combined with what he was asked to do at Ohio State. That's how you have a well-rounded, scouting report, a true evaluation of what this guy can be. Because you may just look at what he did at Ohio State, like, oh, 9 catches. He didn't really do much. He's not that. I don't know why people are higher on, but then you merge that with his Purdue film. You're like, oh, okay, I get why people are talking about. I see why he was at the Senior Bowl, because it makes sense. Well, yeah, it makes sense now when you think about him as a budding star at Purdue to go to Ohio State and just kind of be one of the guys.
Man, by the way, I love that you gave a shout out there to Colgate. I had a couple buddies go there, play football. Guys, it's not toothpaste. That's a real university, and they play some good football over there. It's great. Now, Emory, there's a couple of players. Max Clare was one of the interesting ones that I had to go back. But then there's guys that just like, you start to watch the film, you look into their profiles, and you're just like, what happened? Why did this guy not become more of a thing? And I'm sure there's a lot of them out there, but one of the guys I came across was Oscar Delp, who I feel like I'm a bit higher on because of the athletic ability. You talk about fluidity. I love his fluidity in the open field, his after catch ability. I personally found that he was an underutilized player at Georgia. And for those hearing about him for the first time, he was on the team the same time as Brock Bowers, Darnell Washington. There was a whole mess of tight ends there, right? So it's obviously going to be hard for him to produce early. But how how do you try to project a player like Delp who didn't really get the usage we want to see going into the NFL? And you say, man, there could be some untapped potential here. Whether it's with Delp or with any other player, how do you try to evaluate that as they make their jump to the next level?
Well, it's interesting for Delp because I'm always trying to loop the future with the past tense, right?
Mm.
Looking for patterns. And so and even though he didn't compete at an all-star game, but this is why you go to all-star games to get the good idea of what guys actually are doing, what they're capable of, right? Or they're on the side for a reason. But for Delp, and the reason why I brought up the history part of it, we just saw this last year with a highly productive tight end, at his previous school, going to Georgia. You think, oh yeah, he about to cook, and then he just ends up being one of the guys because he was underutilized, but he ends up on the NFL roster and is in the rotation for the Minnesota Vikings, I believe, and Ben Urasek, who was killing it at
Mm.
Stanford. He was like, oh, this is your classic. Remember, Stanford had that run of tight ends, the Kobe Fleeners and all of those guys, right? Urasek is just like, oh, he killed it at Stanford. Then he's the portal. He goes to Georgia. Like, oh, boom, there's the Brock Bowers replacement, and then he barely plays because he plays a lot like Oscar Delp did this year. So because I saw what happened with Ben Urasek last year, I have full confidence in Oscar Delp being a good player in the pros because we saw glimpses of that. I remember watching, and this was during, obviously I covered college football during the season, so I'm watching games live, and I'm watching. This is when Brock Bowers was there, and I want to say it was his last year, so it was Delp's first year or something like that, or second. I'm like, oh wow, they got another dude like this number 4 dude, like legit too. Like man, where did they just find these tight ends?
They're just printing tight ends out of the
Right, and they
factory
all
over
carbon
there.
copies of one another. So Delp is someone, if this is where the evaluation comes in, where you just really watch the talent and just gamble on the talent. Like the fit may not be there. This reminds me a lot of when I went out and scouted. I went to the Boston College Kansas game, and I went there specifically to look at Puka Williams. And I'm
Mm.
like, yo, because Puka was nice, but I noticed during that game that the backup running back was killing it too. And I'm like, man, this dude, like, this is one of these true sleepers that a rare sleeper from a power or FBS program, that's not starting, but he gets his opportunity, and then he goes in there and does really well. And then he ends up transferring that year to go another year in college and plays at Virginia Tech. Then he goes and plays for now his name slips my mind, but he plays for the Bears for a long time. And I think he's still in the league as a RB2 or 3, but he had 1,000 yards with the Bears too. But that's the type of stuff you see when you look at an Oscar Delp, and juxtaposed to what happened in his career and Ben Urasek. But again, you can go somewhere watching one guy who's a starter, and then you get the backup, that also performs well. You're like, man, he probably could be a better pro than he was in college, even though he doesn't have the productivity on the collegiate level that he goes now and outproduces the starter at the pro level, than he did in college.
Emory, don't mind me. You just have me looking up Bears leading running backs by years here.
I want to say I can't
I
remember
had
his
no
name,
idea.
but I could tell you right now it was Puka Williams and somebody else. Man, it is one of those things where you have so many names, uh, Kansas, and it was
That's that's going to be one of those things where I promise you I cannot ask you another question until I know what that name was.
right
It's going to
because
be just itching my brain.
it was him and now I'm gonna now I gotta find it now because
Guys, this is why Emory has the database of so many players because I mean, like, you can't possibly memorize all these names, but they're always there in the back of the head.
they're always there. Hold on, because when you go to find it, you scrambling because I don't want people to be like, well, who's his name that he was talking about, that he couldn't remember.
Now I'm like I'm tripping out here. I can't think of who it is, guys. I know this is great podcasting, so
Oh, it is
enjoy
great
it. But
podcast because
we're on minute 35. Get over it.
yeah,
We're
like you once you hear the name Khalil Herbert.
Oh my god! You know what, man? I'm really upset because Khalil Herbert was my guy.
Exactly.
Like
So that's
I was unhealthily invested in Khalil Herbert, and now I'm upset at myself.
So that's what it was. Like I'm watching Puka Williams at him versus Boston College, but I'm like, man, every time this kid Herbert gets a carry, he looks good. Even though he's a backup, and I was
So
glad he
smooth,
got the extra year because he then went to um, Virginia Tech as a feature guy, and that got him drafted because he was not obviously the starter as opposed to being an RB2 at Kansas.
guys. This is why you join in the show. Is to get this kind of stuff. We're doing Khalil Herbert stuff here at minute 35, man. That's what it's all about. Emory, last thing I want to talk about here is, the more and more that I've tried to blend the worlds of, like, I had the opportunity to work in the scouting department at FIU, Florida International University in Miami for a year after I graduated from there. And it was so cool to learn the ins and outs of what goes into evaluating player talent. It's obviously very different from how you're evaluating a high school kid going to college
Mm-hmm.
versus a college player going to the NFL. One of the things that I keep hearing so much, and now just trying to bridge that gap now into fantasy, is people saying, well, this guy gets a lot of schemed up touches, almost like it's a bad thing. And one of the things you keep mentioning here is this guy can get open quick. This guy can get the ball quick. I see it as a positive when a tight end, especially, is getting schemed open for touches because you only want to scheme open guys that you believe in that are weapons. Do you see any prospects from this class that you're like, that guy's going to get schemed open for touches? Maybe someone we haven't talked about, or it can be a guy that we've already talked about.
Well, I mean, it's obviously the guys at the top.
Mhm.
The Kenyon Sadiqs, because again, that's someone that didn't have the gaudy numbers at Oregon, but you can look at how he runs and how he plays. It's like, all right, I can give this guy a tight end around. I can give this guy a quick screen. You know what I'm saying, and have him break a tackle and get upfield. I can see the Eli Stowers being the one-on-one solo on the outside. Even the guy I brought up, Dan Villari from uh, Syracuse,
Syracuse.
as the QB power guy that now has the ability to throw because he was a quarterback. But also, man, he could be a red zone threat. He may not have the receiver numbers, but you may look at the end of the year like this dude has 6 catches, but 10 rushing touchdowns. Like, how does that make sense, right? That's the type of schemed up opportunities you can get for a guy that has that type of athleticism, that type of versatility and skill set. So for me, that's who I would say fits that mold. All of these guys, because again, it's tough to know that now without knowing where they are. And I know some people say, well, that's just having the answers to the test, but for tight ends, it really does matter where they go. Running backs are running backs. All you got to do is turn around and hand them the ball. But in terms of tight ends, that's a more of a niche, uh, you know, option in terms of we don't really have to get the tight end the ball. We really want to, because a lot of teams nowadays are so predominantly wide receiver and running back focused that the tight end kind of get left. They get the scraps, and unless you have a super elite tight end that warrants that. But with the way the league is going, you kind of if you have a dominant tight end, that tells me you don't have dominant wide receivers. And I think that's where you kind of have to wait and see where these guys land before you have a better gauge of what they can actually produce.
Yeah, that's always going to be the thing, is seeing where these guys end up on draft night and then what their responsibilities are going to be once they get into the league, because not every tight end position is going to be treated the same for every single team. Emory, I love it, man. The in-depth analysis here. We got names that aren't in my rookie guide that I hadn't even heard of, so I love it. Learn about Dan Villari, Bauer Sharp, getting some deep sleepers here on the show. Can you please let everyone know where they can find you, where they can find your work and your rookie guide, please?
Follow me on Twitter at FBall Game Plan. You can catch me on CBS Sports HQ, talking prospects all the way through the draft. And you can go order the draft guide now, footballgameplan.com/2026 draft guides. PDF form comes to your inbox. It's not a physical copy. I get that question a lot. If it was, I'd have to charge you $400 for a 1,200 page book. So, so to get all 1,200 prospects. And again, when we say 1,200, it's not just all offensive guys, offensive and defensive guys, obviously. But it's a great value, cheaper than gas. So footballgameplan.com/2026 draft guide.
I'm stealing that. I'm gonna use that. It's cheaper than gas now because that's just gonna work for everything, man. Emory, thank you so much, and for everybody watching or listening, as always, I want to thank you for joining us the whole way through. For myself, for Emory, I'll see you next time. Adios.